Every day between now and November, the American people are going to know that the only reason the border is not secure is Donald Trump and his MAGA Republican friends. It's time for Republicans in the Congress to show a little courage, to show a little spine, to make it clear to the American people that you work not for anyone else.
That was President Joe Biden speaking from the White House yesterday, calling on Congress to pass the Senate's bipartisan border bill, which Republicans are now firmly against and seems likely to die today. Joining us now, White House reporter for the Associated Press, Darlene Superville. Good to see you, Darlene. So let's start with the policy part of this first, that if this bill does indeed go down to defeat today, as it seems likely, what would the White House's strategy be for a plan B? And is there one in terms of both the border, but also getting aid to Ukraine in that country's time of need?
Good morning, Jonathan. That's $1 million question. It isn't clear at this point what the plan B is. The White House had been saying up until last week that what they wanted was the bigger, comprehensive bill the president sent up to Congress some weeks ago, the money for Ukraine, funding for Israel, the border, and some allies in Asia. Excuse me, the president doesn't seem, at least at this point, interested in a standalone funding bill for Israel. He would want that money coupled with funding for Ukraine. There is deep and growing opposition in Congress, particularly among Republicans, to continuing to send more money to Ukraine. And so that's the holdup. That's part of the reason the president coupled all these measures together in the first place, because he and the White House, saw the rising opposition in Congress to giving more money to Ukraine. So it's unclear at this point what the next steps are going to be.
And of course, as he kept saying, they gave the Republicans what they wanted on the border, and the Republicans pulled the plug. So we just played that clip from the president making clear that he's going to use this as a campaign issue, that if indeed this bill is defeated, he is going to go around the country, he says, and tell voters who want something done at the border. The reason why nothing is happening is because Donald Trump and his followers. So tell us what that could look like. Is there confidence in the Biden world that the president is going to have a strong voice on that issue around the country?
Absolutely. As you just said, this was a bill that Republicans wanted. We heard them talk for months, maybe, years about the border and needing to secure the border and money for the border and border security. And here you had a group of lawmakers who spent the better part of the last 4 months negotiating this, only to see Republicans then turn around, listen to former President Donald Trump, and basically tank the bill. And in doing so, they've given the president and Democrats an issue to run on in November. And I think you'll see the president raise this in his speeches at fundraisers that he's giving. He's going to New York today, for example, for 3 fundraisers. And I would be surprised if he doesn't bring that up today. I think you'll also hear him talk about it at other campaign events, get out the vote events that he's been doing, and just make the point, as you heard him say, that every day, he may not do it every day between now and November, but I think we will certainly hear the president hammering this point home about what the White House would say is just hypocrisy on the side of Republicans. And another example, again, that the White House would say of Republicans putting the interests of the former president ahead of the interests of the American people.
And we certainly anticipate hearing a lot from President Biden in the coming days. As you mentioned, he's got a trio of fundraisers in Manhattan today, tomorrow in Virginia at a Democratic lawmakers retreat. He also suggested he might be holding some sort of news conference tomorrow. So they also can connect this, the border, of course. But as you know, Darlene, the Biden team points to polling that suggests when they talk about democracy, that resonates with voters. And senior aide was telling me yesterday that if indeed these bills go down, the Ukraine piece of it will be important, too, because there is Republican opposition, to be sure. But general polling suggests most Americans still want to back Ukraine. And they say they're going to be able to paint the Republicans as doing Vladimir Putin's bidding. Talk to us about how they might do that.
Exactly. And the president touched on this yesterday in his remarks, that every week, every month that goes by without additional U.S. assistance to Ukraine just puts Ukraine at a disadvantage against Russia. And if Russia were to succeed and barrel through Ukraine, what's to stop Russia from going into other countries? For example, Poland, which borders Ukraine, or even Finland. And both of those countries are NATO members under the NATO Charter. An attack on one one member is an attack on all. And a scenario like that would most definitely pull the United States into a direct war with Russia, which is something the president has been trying to avoid these past couple of years in terms of trying to help Ukraine fight off Russia on its own.
Yeah,
so there's that angle, too.
Yeah, there's such important, weighty global consequences, you say, and it also just seems like the Republicans have handed President Biden a couple good campaign issues here as things start to heat up for 2024. We're always grateful for Darlene Superville, White House reporter for the Associated Press, when she can join us. Darlene, thank you so much. And